Professor Homa here. Welcome to exercise 2. We're using the date method, but we're just basically going to write an HTML page that says today is the 5th, if today's the 5th. When I did it another time, it was the 3rd, so we do have to account for that suffix changing a little bit, but we're just going to write something that says today is the 5th. Now, here's the date object, and basically what the date object does, here's an ID demo. Here's a script, no function, just a variable that says new date, uses the new date object, and it's represented by D. The variable D equals a new date object, and we're just writing D, which is the date object, inner HTML to that paragraph. So if we preview this, and in Text Wrangler I could just drag this down to Firefox. If I drag this here, it just does a date timestamp. Just generic date timestamp, and you could put that on any page. You could style it based on your ID with CSS or anything like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to customize that. We're going to pull out the day, this 5, and we're going to say today is the 5th. And we're going to add the suffix, and we're also going to account for it being a different day, like the 3rd or the 2nd or the 1st. Okay, so again, I'm going to go back to Text Wrangler. Variable that represents the date object, and there's the variable is stuck in there, so it rewrites the inner HTML into here, and that's all that really does. Nothing special with this one. Now I'm going to move to the next one, is the getDate method, and you can get this off of W3 Schools, where I'm getting some of these to start with, because they're nice little starter files. And this one is a little different. This one is in a function, so it puts all this stuff in a function. And the function is called myFunction. And notice this one also has a button that's going to run the function. You know, that's part of it too. If you don't need it, if it's just going to run automatically, you don't always need a function to put some of this stuff on a page. Inner HTML doesn't need a function to make that happen, but since we have a button, we need a button to run that function. So anyway, we have a variable here, D equals the date object, and that's the full date, the timestamp. Then we have another variable, X will equal basically this demo area where the text is going to change. So that's really going to be that ID area. X is going to represent that. We're getting that element by ID, so that P paragraph that's named ID. Our demo, we're going to name that X. So it's just a shorter way to do that. So that way we could just say x.innerHTML equals d.getDate. And what we're using here is the getDate method. The getDate method basically pulls the day of the month out of the full date object. That's where this D comes from. D is the full date object, getDate is the method, so it's going to return something like, if today's the 5th, that it should return 5. Okay, so if I preview this one in Firefox, and I click the button, we reload it, it says 5. Now if we wanted it to say today is the 5th, we could go back and change this. What we could do here is this inner HTML, we could throw a string around it, and we could just put quotes and say today is, and then a space and a quote, so we have a space between there. And then remember, for variables or even this little variable with a method, we could put a plus sign in here to concatenate, and I'm going to concatenate that, and the semicolon will not be in there. And then after this, I'll put quotes and put TH period to finish it off. And make sure you finish off your quotes. Okay, so it should say today is the 5th now. So if I save this and refresh it in the browser, it says today is the 5th. Now that works fine, and we could be done if that's what we really wanted to do. Although we should say today is the 5th. We should put that in there. That would be the. But if today wasn't the 5th, if today was the 3rd, it would still have a TH on it. It'd be the 5th, or the 2nd, or the tooth. And when I was working on the 3rd, I had some of those issues come up where my if-else statement wasn't working, and that's how I troubleshooted a little bit. So we know it's the 5th. We know it's going to have a TH, okay, but we can't assume it's always going to be that. So we're going to use an if-else statement. So I'm going to use another file. This was just to kind of practice with here. So I'm going to get another file called getMethod_if-else_start. And this is the one you're going to work on, and you can save this with your name. So I'm going to save this one and put my last name in here. I think I actually have one that I was working on. and I'll put my last name in here. And it has some comments in here to help you through this, so you know how to do this. So we are going to write a variable that stands for that. We already did that, I think. But because we're going to do a if-else statement, we don't want to be using the get date method in every if-else condition. We'd rather have something a little shorter and easier to read, so we don't have to be worrying about brackets and dots and all those things. So we're going to write one more variable here, and we're just going to say var, and we'll call it today's date. Now this is probably a little longer than we need, but that's what I've been using. So today's date, and it's just the number date, and we're going to say equals d.getDate. Now what that means is, I'll put a semicolon at the end. What that means is we're going to call today's date is the same thing as d.getDate. Now what is d.getDate? GetDate is pulling the day or the number of the month, the number day, like 1 through 31, out of the date object. So D is the date object, this is the day. So it's going to pull it out of there and return something like a 5 if today's the 5th. So that's what's going to happen. So we're just saying today's date is really going to be 5, but we can't say it's going to be equal to 5 because it could be whatever today's date is. So tomorrow it'll be 6. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write a string that basically changes depending on what day it is. Now we basically have 4 scenarios. It's either going to be the 1st or the 21st with an ST. It's going to be the 2nd or the 22nd with an ND. It's going to be the 3rd or 23rd with a RD. And also 31st, I forgot, is also in there with the STs. And then everything else is going to have a TH, because most of them have THs, but not all of them. So we're going to have 4 conditions, and we'll start with the least amount, or close to the least amount, and then the TH will be the else, where everything other than those kind of specific ones. So however you start this off, you could start with the ones that have the least, or you could just start with the smallest number, and we'll do that. And I'm going to start an if-else statement here right after this. Now keep in mind, here's our function. There's where it starts. It has the function keyword, it's named my function, and it has its opening curly bracket. And here's its closing. So they'll stay there. Make sure you don't mess with them. And if you want to just like hit return a couple times, just so you know, because sometimes all these other curly brackets, you'll get confused. So you'll have, all together in this function, we'll have 1, 2 curly brackets plus 4 times 2 is 8. We'll have 10 altogether. So you got to keep track of them and make sure they're even, and make sure they, they pair up. So, but we're going to copy and paste a lot of this stuff, so it'll go pretty easy. So we're going to start off with our if statement. If is a keyword, so you can see it'll say if, and then we put our if condition in parentheses. If, and we're basically going to say we're going to use our variable today's date. So if today's date equals, and now when we say equals, we got to put equals equals. And sometimes for strict equality we could put 3 equals, but for now we use 2. We use if today's date is, and we'll start with the smallest number, 1. We'll just go from there. If it's 1, okay, but we can't just use 1. We want to use an or, because it's going to be either the 1st or the 21st. Or the 31st. There's going to be 3 here. So we can put an or in between here. So I'm going to use the forward slash, or the straight slash means or. Somebody said this is called pipes. I had it last year. Somebody said that's called pipes. So for programmers, you're going to put in pipes. But anyway, that means or. So if today's date is equal to 1, or, now you have to write it this way. So I'll just copy and paste this. You have to put today's date again. And I'll put 21, and then I'll put my pipes, and I'll paste it again, or 31, because we have 3 scenarios it could be. Now these 3, and close my parentheses. So if, now here we need 2 curly brackets. 1, 2, I'll put them there right away. And for now, as we learn curly brackets, I'll break them up and keep them on their own line. Now what happens if today's date is 1, 21, or 31? Well, we're going to write an inner HTML with an ST at the end. So we can do this. Our variable for that get element is x. So we can put x here. Dot inner HTML equals, and what's it going to say? This is pretty simple. It's going to say today is the, I forgot is the, put a space, and then we're going to concatenate. but we're going to add our variable in there. So I'm going to put plus, and I'm going to put it's today's date is what we're going to put in there, whatever it may be, and a plus again. You have to surround it by the plus sign. And then we're going to put whatever suffix is going to be in the end. So if it's 1, 21, or 31, it's going to have an ST. So in quotes, we're going to put ST, and we could put a period at the end, or you put an exclamation point, whatever you want. So that's what it's going to be. Now, we could even test this now, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to copy this. So all the other ones are going to be very similar. So we don't have to write out a lot of this code. We'll copy it. We'll paste it. And now this second one, and we'll use the next number, is going to be a 2, 22, and there's no 32nd in the month, so we can get rid of that, and we can get rid of the or. So it's just going to be 2 or 22. So if it's, now we're not going to use if again. We're actually going to use else if. Only the first one will get the if. The second one will get an else if. So for multiple ones in between, they could be else if. So it always starts off with an if. If that's not true, there could be an else if. There could be multiple else ifs, and then after that, there's an else, which means everything else. Anything else that's not of the first few. So for our else if here, we're going to use 222, and we just have to change this. It just means that the ending, it's still going to say today is today's date, but if it's the second, it's going to put an ND at it. That's it. That was pretty easy, and we're going to have another else if, because we have another scenario before the TH, and that is the RD. So I'm going to put a 3 and a 23. And I don't think there's any others that get an RD. And I'll change this to RD. And remember, it's if, then else if, then else if. And if you had another one, it would be else if. And then after that, I'll copy this again, or paste it. The last one is an else. Now, else does not need a condition. It just means everything else. So no condition here for else. Else just means if it's not any of this stuff, it's going to be this. So if it's not any of these, it's going to be a TH. Okay? I can move this back up. This is the closing bracket for the function, and I'll just, it doesn't hurt to put in closing bracket for function, so you know that. Remember with CSS, we had to kind of keep track of things that way. The code gets a little messy. So that's the closing bracket for the function. This is the opening bracket for the function. And everything else is inside here. So we have a couple variables, D, X, and today's date. And then we're just concatenating today's date. Now, if I spelled today's date wrong, that's why copying and pasting is a good idea. But if I spelled something wrong, if I missed a plus sign, we're going to have a problem. But I'm going to save this, and I'm going to test it out in my browser. I'll just drag this down to Firefox, or you could run it if you're in Notepad. Click the button to display today's day of the month. I guess that's okay. And I'll hit try it, and it says today is the 5th. It works. Now, the only way to test this with other days, it would be to change the code and just see if you get an RD or something like that. Like, you'd almost have to fake it and say, put in an RD for the else, and then see if the RD shows. Just so to make sure your other ones are working, you'd have to kind of mess with that a little bit for testing purposes. But for now, this seems to be working, and we have all kind of scenarios covered. That's what our if else does. It covers multiple scenarios, and we could put different messages, for these if we wanted to. Like if you had something where it was day of the week, you could put different things based on the day of the week. If it was Monday, you'd be like, oh, it's Monday. If it was Friday, you'd be like, yeah. Okay, so anyway, I think we're pretty good here. We did our if else. We did our or comparison. We have our double equals operators. And remember, or, you can call them pipes. We'll be like programmers. We'll call them pipes. Also notice that I'm using camel case for today's dates for my variables, my function. That means camel case means lowercase. You're using capital letters to separate. So like the humps of a camel. Okay? So I think we're pretty good with this. I'll move this up here so you can see it all together. But that's it.